Hello, welcome to Full Record Jacket. Thanks for watching the music discussion show with me, Phil, and Ben.
That's me. This face right here. It's all me.
On this particular edition, we are simply going to talk about what we've been listening to in the last week. So, Ben, what have you been listening to in the last week?
Oh, Phil, I've been listening to a plethora. I can't even say plethora. Plethora? Is that the word?
Plethora.
Plethora?
Yeah.
A plethora, isn't it? A plethora of various genres. Do you know what I started off the week listening to? Because we obviously talked about U2. I listened to Achtung Baby.
Yeah.
And I fell into the same problem that you did, because you said you like to listen to it at night because it's a night album. Oh, it is plethora. All right, smarty pants.
I'm not that smart. I had to look it up in the dictionary.
Well, I only got a C in GCSE English, or a B, one of those two. Yeah, so I listened to Achtung Baby. And like you, I found it really difficult driving to work in daylight and listening to it, because I had that mindset of it should be listened to in the dark. But it's a good album. Very, very 90s feel to it. I think I said to you, it's got a very 90s feel to it. What else have I been listening to? I revisited All That You Can't Leave Behind. And it turns out there was quite a bit of it I could have left behind, because it didn't have the same impact 10, 15 years afterwards as what it should have done. I've also been listening to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. Not Mainstream. That's a Matchbox 20 Best Of album. Exile on Main Street. Completely different albums. So I've been listening to this. I've only listened. I'll take it down off its stand. It's a 2-disc album. I've only listened to the first disc. Yes, I've been listening to a bit of that. I think we did a bit of research on it when Mick Jagger said that some of it is possibly some of the worst mix he's ever heard. And once I'd gotten that out of my head, I really enjoyed it. It's very bluesy, isn't it? It's very sort of...
Yeah, this is the thing with Exile on Main Street. It's a bit weird, but this is a highly acclaimed Rolling Stones album where you have to not let Mick Jagger put you off. Because, it's Keith's album, some say. It's definitely
I got it. It sounds very much like... Have you listened to his solo on Sacred Heart from about 2016 or 14?
Well, I've heard a fair bit of Keith's solo, and of course he is that. It's the whole blues, rock, traditional American roots thing coming to the fore. So obviously that's very much Keith Richards. So you basically you've listened to two of my very, very favourite albums of all time, which I have always really, really liked, and I still hold up as being two of the greatest of all time. That's Achtung Baby and Exile on Main Street. And obviously those are albums that I'm sure some of our viewers will like them. We've probably got other viewers who will have a differing opinion.
I've enjoyed what I've heard of this so far. And then yesterday, because I was feeling a little unwell, which is also a Matchbox 20 song, I hope Rob Thomas is going to be paying me some royalties for all these mentions. I was in the bath last night, and I decided to revisit a little bit of mid-90s Britpop, and I listened to the Menswear Nuisance album when I was in the old soaky room.
I remember Menswear. Right. I remember that band. Now, the thing I chiefly remember about them, I'm finding it difficult to remember the music, but there's a massive amount of hype. Was that around 97? Was that
95, I think the album came out.
Oh, was it that early?
I always liked the song Being Brave. I think that came out in 96. But it was all right. I kind of class it as flimsy. That sort of... They were... Obviously, it was a band full of men. But it kind of they sort of sound a little bit like that Elastica sort of feel, if you know what I mean. They're almost like the
Yeah.
male Elastica.
Well, as I remember, they had all the branding of the name, and just the fact that it was called menswear. It struck me as if whichever label had signed them were hoping they were going to be the next Blur.
Yeah,
That's how
I get the impression.
I thought of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that ooh sort of vocal. Is that the best way to describe it? They had that the at, didn't they? It wasn't men's. It was and then the A was just an at, which I don't know why they did that for, but
yeah, I don't have great memories of them at all. I do remember that they were considered to be a bit of a hyped up flash in the pan. Maybe I'm being unkind to them. Maybe they did make a great album that I've never heard. I don't know, but well, you can tell me. What is it like?
It wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. It was okay. It's not a Morning Glory. It's not a it's
not even a Park Life.
No, not a Park Life. What's the Pulp album?
A different class.
Different class. Yes, yeah. It's not that sort of. It's not one of those albums in the 90s which is going to be on your old sticker board to keep looking at. I think one or two listens, I think that'd be enough because it's got too many of that woo sort of vocal in it, and that's the only way I can describe some of the vocal. That sort of very elastic-y sort of, the way they sort of get to the end of a sentence and go woo. So, but no, I quite enjoyed it. I've also been listening to, and I've got it down here. Where is it? I think I put a post on our Instagram, but I've been listening to a bit of Lucky Tat. I've not been a fan of hip hop, like modern hip hop, for about, I don't think hip hop's meant anything for probably 10, 15, 20 years. Especially since its heyday of, your Ice-T's and Tupac, Biggie, all those sort of people. But I've actually really enjoyed that. It's actually really good sort of, it takes you back to that sort of mid-90s. I mean, and he's not singing about gun crime and gunning somebody's girlfriend down or anything, like that sort of battle rap of the mid-90s. But it's actually quite thoughtful, but it's got that sort of feel to it of that sort of mid-90s rap, whereas now rappers just seem to want to rap about how big their butts are and, what trainers they're wearing, which means absolutely nothing anymore. They have no struggles anymore. So, but yeah, that's what I've been listening to this week, Phil. And then a little mix-up of a playlist that I've got with about 900 songs in it. And the Blue Tones came on today, and I thought about revisiting them at some point this week. Turns out, I remember all the words to Slight Return.
Yeah, you don't have to have the solution. So that's the album with the peacock on the front.
That is the album with the peacock.
No, I have heard that back at the time it came out, and I must admit I don't really have much of a recollection of it. It's so long ago, and I didn't really get deeply into it. And I remember the single, and that was a good single in its time. Certainly better than some of the others.
Went to number one, if I remember rightly.
Was it really a number one? Okay, I don't know, but
I believe it did go to number one. I'm testing my 90s knowledge here, but I'm almost sure it went to number one.
Most singles by bands like that peaks at number 2 behind something like, I don't know,
Robson and Jerome.
Something like exactly. So
didn't Robson and Jerome keep Wonderwall off number one?
I think they did, and that kind of thing. And there was something else. There was another. Was it Common? Am I thinking Common People by Pulp? There was something quite middle of the road that stopped that being number one, if I recall correctly, but I can't.
But Common People came out summer '95, and that was around the time that Robson Jerome had their first hit. Every drop of rain that falls.
Okay,
that one
could have been that then. Could have been them.
So it could have been that. Robson and Jerome kept off. Yeah, that must be embarrassing. Robson and Jerome. I bet you've got their album.
Ben, we did Guilty Pleasures last week. It's not the time. It's not the place. No.
But yeah, that's what I've been listening to this week, Phil.
Well, that's nice to know. So I'm hoping that I'm going to get you fully into Achtung Baby and Exile on Main Street.
It is there. It is
It's there.
It's on the record player, which is just out of shot.
Have you got the gatefold with all the postcard things in it as well? Does it have the postcards in?
Let's have a look. Oh,
it's got the sleeves with the
there's
track.
One of the inner sleeves.
Track info on the sleeves, yeah.
And it is.
Does it have the
gatefold?
Yeah.
That in all its glory. And let's have a look, see what's inside, because I don't think it's got any postcards so far. No, no. What's inside? Oh no. What's that there? No, that's the label. No, as interesting as this 30 seconds was, there is literally just that. No postcards, unfortunately.
They're not that exciting, to be honest.
No, it's a good thick album. If you're going to club an intruder with anything, pick up Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, not Stream. Check out Exile on Main Stream if you want, but for the purpose of this, the Rolling Stones.
Okay, so my listening this week has been, it's been a bit Canadian because I've been channeling
Celine Dion.
Yeah, I've been channeling the 60s Flower Child thing with the debut album by Joni Mitchell, Song to a Seagull. And this is Joni's first album, came out in 1968. It was produced by David Crosby, and it had a bit of a thing about it because she was never quite happy with the sound, because David Crosby did something he supposedly recorded it by getting her to sing next to an open piano lid, because he was hoping that her voice would resonate off the strings or something like this. I don't know whether they'd all been smoking something, but apparently the mix of the album, her voice, she always felt sounded a little bit muddy. And so this has been
muddy.
This has been tweaked a bit to alter it a little bit. Not a total remix, but just a sort of a re-engineering. And this was approved by Joni herself just a couple of years ago. So that, not that I've ever heard the original, so I'm not really that interested in making that comparison. It's just I've never listened to this album before. Quite pretty. I'm going to have to get into it more. It's just Joni and acoustic guitar and lots of early Joni Mitchell type songs. It probably isn't going to be as great as some of the other albums like Blue, but it could still. But some people do seem to really love it, though, reading online. So I'll try and get further into that. My other Canadian excursion, one was a repeat of an album that I have loved since it came out. Not all Neil Young fans like this album, but I do, and that is Mirrorball. And that's the album that he made with Pearl Jam.
Oh.
And this all came about when they performed together on the VMA Awards. This must be one of the first albums that came out in a cardboard CD case in the days when everybody was still making the plastic boxes.
Did you ever feel cheated by that? I used to hate
at the time.
It
felt a little bit cheating, but now, of course, it's obviously Neil was ahead of his time with the environmental thing.
I used to hate that.
I think that's recycled as well. But
Kings of Leon debut album, I remember getting that, and it came in cardboard. And out of disgust, I went and bought the Thrills album, and realised that wasn't any sort of threat to anybody.
Well, I like this album. See, Neil Young and Pearl Jam did some award ceremony performance together, and obviously they were sort of admired each other, so they got together. Very limited time. It was supposedly done in about 4 days. Brendan O'Brien produced it, who was Pearl Jam's producer, but it was going to be credited to both. But Pearl Jam's label, that I think was Epic, Columbia, they refused to allow them to appear credited on Neil Young's album. So it's listed as a Neil Young album, but it is Pearl Jam on it as the backing band. And I think it's one of the most up-tempo rocking Neil Young albums in his entire catalogue. If you think of something like Rockin' in the Free World, songs of that sort of tempo and intensity, but recorded by Brendan O'Brien, so a little bit more raw and rough and ready sounding. Not a hi-fi album, but a rocking in your face album. But I really like it. I think it's got some great tunes on it, and I've always really liked it. But it does divide Neil Young fans. So if you're a Neil Young fan, you might be interested in that album. But
I always get confused with Sonic Youth and Pearl Jam for some reason.
Yeah, well,
is Pearl Jam the one with Eddie Vedder?
Eddie Vedder.
Yeah,
I would love to have heard Neil Young and Sonic Youth, but that never happened. The other one
never happened.
Should have happened, but the other one is an interesting one. This is Hawks and Doves. This is also Neil Young, and this is an album that came out in 1980, and it's only half an hour long, and half of it was stuff he had left over anyway. So that makes it sound like it's...
Which is unusual. Normally his guitar solos go on for that
Exactly. So it is. I do actually like this. I see this as the Neil Young version of Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline, in the sense that it's kind of, on the face of it, it's a minor album. It's not very long. The songs are not designed to be big epic songs or anything. They're quite small, but it's got that intimacy, and it's got that kind of, you just kind of get to like it. But the first half, I say, has these songs he'd already recorded. The standout of that is called The Old Homestead for me, which is a 7-minute Neil Young, one of his weird trip story songs, I'd say, and it's got Levon Helm of the band on drums, and it's just quite atmospheric and groovy.
Would you put up there with Nebraska? Is it that sort of?
Not that kind of album. It's more. It's not as dark as Nebraska anyway.
Yeah, I'm not in tone, as in more of it
telling
it's
a
an
story.
album that. Yeah.
Well, there's only one story really on here. That's The Old Homestead. I wouldn't say the other songs are story songs. Side 2 he recorded quite quickly in a session, and apparently he did it in an afternoon. And it's just very short songs that are a bit country-ish and a bit sort of lightweight Neil Young, but somehow I quite like it.
He did it in an afternoon. I can barely do a spreadsheet in an afternoon.
Well, this was at the time that his son, I think it's his first son, who had cerebral palsy, had been born, and so he wasn't spending a massive amount of time making his records at this time. So it's an interesting period for him, but I quite like it. I wouldn't say rush out and get it as an all-time classic, but if you're into Neil Young, you might find Hawks and Doves to be an interesting diversion. And that's pretty much that. I did also have a little blast of the debut album by some band called the Rolling Stones. Came out in 1964, and I do enjoy early Stones. I like most Stones. So that's what I've listened to.
I enjoy the Rolling Stones more than I enjoy kidney stones. That's a little fact for you there, Phil.
Thanks for that, Ben.
Thank you. My pleasure.